Mitchell, how are you going?
I'm great, thanks. Owen Rask, how are you?
Good, thanks. Use my surname there. Sounds very
I
serious.
was going to try to say the whole part, but I thought I'd just stick with Rask. Be on brand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about the First Home Super Saver Scheme, and we'll get into all the details of that today. If you are watching live, you can ask any questions. If you're on X, YouTube, wherever you are, you can pop your questions in. And if you want to follow up, this will be available on replay. If you can't watch it all today at lunchtime, that's totally fine. And if you're listening on the Australian Finance Podcast this Friday, we're recording this a day ahead of time. Just send us your questions via the usual means. There's a link in your podcast player that says ask a question, or you can head over to the Rask community. So, Gem, today we're talking about the First Home Super Saver Scheme. We've got a lot of questions and kind of talking points that we want to get to because it's one of those things that it makes sense to understand before June 30th, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this is one that we actually get quite a lot of questions come through the podcast through the usual channel. So we get lots of investing ones, we get lots of cash flow ones, but saving for first home and this particular scheme that has, some complexities around it is definitely a common one.
Yeah. So did you want to maybe, before we jump into the topic, for folks that maybe are tuning in for the first time because they're interested in the First Home Super Saver Scheme, can you just tell us a little bit more about your background potentially? Because it would help to make sense why you're the one that I
Why I
get to
get to
ask
be
all the
here.
questions. Yeah.
Yes. So my background is financial advice. So I've worked in banking and finance for 2 decades now. 15 years of that is as a financial advisor. And I co-host the Australian Finance Podcast with you. So know lots about lots of different areas, and superannuation is one of them. This is a complex kind of area, but I think we probably make it more complicated than it needs to be. So I'm hoping we debunk a lot of those kind of myths and uncertainties in today's. But yeah, financial planning background, qualified financial advisor, and now I work as a money coach and an educator.
Yeah, it's also something in your background is you have plenty of financial advice experience working specifically in superannuation, so different organizations. So you've seen it all, let's say, when it comes to super. So this is a particularly interesting topic to talk about because as you'll find out, June 30 is somewhat of a cutoff date for some of the use of this particular strategy. As with many things, the tax year ends at June 30th for this particular scheme. So we'll be following up on social media just to make sure everyone that is looking to buy their first house is aware of this scheme, but also the importance of the June 30 deadline. Okay.
Which actually, I'll just make a point. It might actually be a little bit further, like forwards. So
Yes.
depending on which super fund and their processing times, it might actually be that you just want to think of it as June 25th to be safe or something like that. But you can always check with your super funds. They'll usually put it on their website what their cutoff dates of the day contributions have to be in and kind of processed by. But yeah, a couple of days before is probably the safest.
Yep, cool. Okay, so that's a really good point. I actually did exchange an email with an accountant this morning, and his suggestion to our shared client was that to make the tax deductible contribution for his client before the 23rd of June, just to be safe. So even though we say June 30th, it's important for everyone to understand the finance world doesn't always work like a tech company. It doesn't just happen to magically work at the exact second you click the button. So it's best to be on the safer side with some of these contributions and the different strategies you use in finance. Give yourself some time. So firstly, I should get to the disclaimer. With this webinar/podcast that we're doing jointly, we do not know your needs, goals, or objectives. So it's really important to understand. Like a good example of this is if you go to change super funds as a result of wanting to do a super strategy for whatever reason, you don't need to, but if you did, you might lose insurance if you go and do that. And then you might never get that same level of insurance back again. It's very possible. So we don't know your needs, goals, or objectives. So any of the information that we deliver today is strictly general in nature. All super funds have a product disclosure statement. You should read that before using that super fund Many of them, nearly all of them, have an insurance guide as well, so you can understand the differences in insurance, what you can and can't do. And finally, if you're unsure of any of your circumstances, you definitely should seek out a financial advisor who can take into account your needs, goals, objectives. That's particularly important for these more kind of time-consuming.
Technically,
Yeah, because you're thinking, well, it costs a few grand to see a financial advisor, but this is worth a few grand, so it might make sense for you to pay for it just so you've got that peace of mind. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Very high level, Gem. Let's start at the top. What is the First Home Super Saver Scheme?
Correct. So it is a government scheme that allows you to save for the deposit of your first home. So if you're eligible for, under the first home, like eligibility, if you're eligible for other grants and kind of things like that, these have conditions that you need to be eligible for. Let me get it finally out. So if you're eligible for that, you can use your superannuation fund to save for the deposit of your first home. It means you're putting extra contributions into super that you can then take out, and it's a tax scheme to help you get there quicker. So there's a couple of benefits because it's designed to get you there faster, and we'll dive into that. But because it's designed to save you tax, you could, one, get to your goal faster, or two, you could get a bigger amount at the same time frame. Does that make sense? So there's two ways that you could use it: get to your goal of a dollar value faster, or get to more money in the same time frame because you had those tax benefits.
Yeah. So the big benefit is you put your money. So let's just talk practical terms then. You've got some money. You put that money into super for a certain amount of time. Then you pull it out and you pay for your first home deposit. And you're saying the benefit is the taxable amount predominantly.
Yeah, so it's a tax strategy. So the benefit for most people, why they would use it, is because superannuation is concessionally taxed, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but it's designed to be used by people that have a higher taxable marginal tax rate than what the super system has. So you could use that as your savings vehicle. But if we put in money to our super now, just everyday kind of people not under this scheme, we can't get it back to what's called preservation, and that's when we're over 60 and we've retired, or over 65 if we're still working. So this means this scheme allows you to put money into super, but you can get it back under this provision that you're buying your first home. So it's kind of like the only time we can use superannuation and then get the money back when it's not for our retirement.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And the big gist of this, and the reason it exists, is so younger people predominantly, but also older people that haven't owned a home before, can save a deposit quicker and keep up with like rising house prices and all that stuff. And knowing that super is a pretty reliable system and it's been around for a while, and the scheme's been around for a while as well. So the difference could be meaningful from the tax perspective, but also helping you get into a home that you might not otherwise be able to afford.
Yeah, so it's designed to give you a bit of a leg up, a bit of a tax break, so that you can get to that goal quicker. The other thing I love about it is it gives you discipline, right? If you're putting money into your super that you can't get back unless it's determined by the ATO that it's for your first home, it adds a layer of discipline, like saving for our retirement, that a lot of us don't have. Like having a big amount of money sitting in a savings account for a goal that's 5 years away might actually be really hard for you to stick with. So this, might have two kind of elements of benefits, and it might be that you're getting that tax saving, but also that you've got that level of discipline and some arm's length away from accessing it constantly.
Yeah, for sure. If you are watching live and you do have some questions, chuck it in the chat. Okay, so we're saving for a deposit. We get there faster because of the tax benefits. We can save a higher amount than we might otherwise, and there's the discipline. So I guess who can use it?
Yep. So anyone who's eligible for, and you go through the eligibility for your first home. So that's somebody that's never owned property in Australia before, including like an investment property, land, commercial property. So that's for this scheme. It has to be for a house that you're going to live in. So usually that's first 6 months, like at least 6 months within the first 12 months that you plan to live in there. So you might buy a property that's got tenants in it, or it might need a bit of a renovation or something, as long as you move into it within the first 12 months. You have to be over 18 at the time that the money comes out of super. So you don't have to be 18 to start using the scheme, but you have to be 18 at the time that you're going to buy the house and request the withdrawal. It can be used by a single person or a couple. So we're going to talk about the limits, which is 50,000 is how much you can save in super. But if you're in a couple, that's 50,000 each, and then suddenly there's up to 100,000 for your deposit that's tax effective for most of us. So over 18, eligible for first home, haven't owned a property before, and it is designed to be where you're going to live, and you're going to be in there within the first 12 months.
Okay, cool. I really want to break out my Mr. Squiggle here for anyone who gets that reference and is young enough like me. But I want to show people that are watching as well, just quickly what this would look like, right? So most people know that there's like a big bucket of money called super. And then you have your kind of bucket of money, which is your wallet. So Gemma, just to confirm, what in effect would happen is, I'll just change color for people that are watching. So I take money from my wallet, I put it into super, right? And super attracts a 15% tax rate, right? Just that's one of the benefits of super, right? But it's also taxed on the way in, depending on what type of contribution you make. And that's why I wanted to kind of show this, because how does money go from me here, wallet, into super, and like what are the limits?
Yeah, so for this scheme, so there's a couple. What makes this confusing is there's rules and caps on how much you can add to your super, just everybody per year. And then there's rules on how much you can add for this scheme. And they do kind of overlap. The amounts don't add up in any kind of way. They don't make a lot of sense. So for everybody who's working under 75 has a concessional cap. And that means this year it's 30,000. And that means that between what's going in that your work has to put in, which is called your super guarantee, that's about to go to 12% of your salary in July. So the money that work's putting in, and any money that you wanted to put in yourself tax effectively, so that it only got taxed at 15%, that cap is 30,000, right?
Okay.
But outside of that, if you wanted to do the first home super saver scheme, you can put up to 15,000 a year under that concessional contribution, but it does actually go towards the 30. Okay, it's not on top of it. But then there's all these other rules, like carry forward if you haven't used it from previous years, that you could put a bit extra. So while I say your concessional cap each year is 30,000, there's different super rules that might mean that that's actually a lot higher for some of us if we have a balance under 500,000 and haven't always used it. So that cap changes based on that, but the first home super saver cap of 15,000 a year doesn't change. It's 15 a year at a maximum, regardless of what other money's gone in, and it can't include that super guarantee that your employer had to put in on your behalf. So it's 15,000 you put in yourself, either asked work to put extra in a salary sacrifice, moved from your bank account. But yeah, so some of the limits we get a bit of leeway, but this one we don't. Does that make sense? I think that's where the confusion comes in.
So I'm assuming then, so say my employer, they put in, say, you're going to say from July, 12%. So my employer puts in 12%. If I was earning $100,000 a year, that's $12,000 that ends in my, like, there's tax in between that, but say $12,000 for round figures, right? That goes into my super. Now that would mean that under the rule that I would have, what's that, like $18,000 left that I could put in under the traditional contributions
Yes, if your
limit.
cap was just 30,000, to keep it really simple. Yep.
Yep.
So you could put in 18, but only 15 of that would go towards you potentially getting it back for a first home, and 3 would stay
in a super fund forever
as retirement money.
Yeah, I shouldn't say forever, but yeah, for a long time. So basically, for the purposes of saving for a deposit, 15K per year is the limit.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
But it cannot include what your employer is already doing. So it is, in a sense, and very simply put, a savings tool that you have to save for.
It's a voluntary contribution that has really come out of your cash flow. Even if it tax effectively came out, it's reduced your net pay in some way, whether you got the money and then you added it yourself, or Works just added extra for you. But it's you have sacrificed something. It's not able to take what Work's already putting in for you. You're not able to use all like your existing balance already if it came from Work. And I think that's the big misunderstanding?
Yeah, misconception. Yeah,
misunderstanding. That people think, I heard that I can use my super to buy my first house. You can't. You have to proactively be using it as a savings tool. And, maybe you've already been salary sacrificing for a few years and you planned that to be retirement money. That could potentially go towards it. But it can't be if you've just had the default amount going from your employer.
Okay. So let's take another example. And I've got a example from our friends at Perla in just a minute. But so say, for example, doesn't really matter. Like my wage is say 100 grand, I'm getting that 12 grand in there. I could then say, I'm going to make a $5,000 once off. So 5K once off contribution to super. And because I'm not going to hit the $30,000 limit, I know that because I've checked. I'm a good saver. I'm a good super saver. I've checked. I'm not going to hit the $30,000 limit. The benefit is that I could claim a tax deduction for that $5,000.
Yes.
Because it's under that limit we talked about, right? So I could claim a tax deduction for $5,000, and then I make the contribution into my super fund, which I'll later withdraw. Now, there are steps involved, which obviously we'll tell you where to go to find that stuff out. But this is obviously interesting so far. So people are like, okay, I can put money in and claim a tax deduction for saving money? And we're like, yeah, you can.
So, and one of the little hacks is that potentially you've already saved the money outside super. Say you've got $30,000 outside of super, not financial advice, just for education purposes. Like right now, if you had 30,000 and you were under your caps and all that, potentially you could just pop the 15,000 in now. It's June. Potentially in July, and claim a tax deduction on that. And potentially in July, you could pop the other 15,000 in. You've just taken off 15,000 out of each taxable income, out of your marginal tax rate, plus you put your deposit in there and started using this scheme. That would mean that you're done for this year that we're currently in, because we're in June 2025. You're done for the next year because you put the 15,000 in that example, and then you would wait till the next year if you wanted to put more in. But you've maxed out that and you've got the tax deduction for both years.
So this is exactly why we're saying June 30th is your key date, people. And we're saying maybe with a few weeks this side of it, ideally in the next week or two, is in Gemma's example, that would be 15 this year, 15 next year. And when I say year, I mean the tax year that ends on June 30th. Then combined, that's obviously 30 grand. But then you're probably thinking, well, if I put that money in there, does it go up? Like I could just put that money in a savings account and let my savings pay me interest. Yes, it does go up. And this is probably one of the big misconceptions about this scheme is what rate of return do I actually get? So did you just at a high level want to talk about this? Because people think it's like, is it risky?
Yes. Well, we actually had this question on the podcast the other day. It makes so much sense because people are saying, hang on, you always tell me not to invest money if my time frame's not, 5, 7 plus years. And superannuation is invested, maybe yours is high risk or high growth, we should say. But the super saver scheme, this money, when you go to take it out, you request via the ATO, we'll probably go through a bit more detail on that. They do a calculation on how long it was in there and they apply a deemed rate. So it doesn't actually actually matter for this withdrawal if your money's gone up or gone down. So if your super fund performed way higher than the deemed rate, that money's staying, you're just still getting the deemed rate and the rest is staying in your retirement savings. If it went backwards, so that money's dropped in value, you're potentially accessing some of your retirement savings to make up the difference in what they've deemed as interest. But instead of, the ATO having to go, right, what did Gemma's fund returned? What did Owen's? Let's work out what they're allowed to take out. They just go, right, for that time, we're applying a deemed rate. So it's a calculation. It's been sitting at around that kind of 7%. And it's reassessed every quarter. It's based on like RBA bank, the 90-day cash bank bill. Like there's a bit to it, but all you need to know is it's not your super fund's performance. Outperformance or under doesn't impact it. It's this deemed rate. And, if that's 7%, you're not paying tax on that. Whereas if you have this saving in a bank account, you're potentially getting 4, maybe 5% if you're lucky. And then that's being taxed at your marginal tax rate at the end of the year when you do your tax return. So for the majority of us, it's probably a much higher return. Plus we potentially got it in there and saved some tax as well. That's where the benefit is.
If you could give me an interest rate of like 7% on like any savings, so not investing, but any savings, I would take it. I would.
But then you've got to think, but then you've got to pay tax at the end of the year on that. So you really, to net off at the same, you probably, in that case, need like an 8.5,
Yeah, true. But like I'm saying, like if it's in super, I'll be like, yeah. And you mean I can pull it out? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And not have to worry, last month we saw some pretty scary stuff happening with the share market. So if you were pulling your super fund out at that point, that wouldn't have dropped your deposit. You haven't risked your deposit because you're getting the deeming rate. It would have affected your super balance because, your deposit's eaten away more at what your retirement savings was. But, that bounces back and different things. So there is still an element of risk there. Absolutely. But the risk is more on your retirement savings being dipped into a little bit more than you anticipated rather than the risk of your deposit not being there when you want it.
Yeah. So for people that aren't watching, I'm just putting a stock price chart on the page, and I'm doing on the horizontal axis, I'm doing the time till house. And so a lot of people would be familiar with the stock market looking a bit jagged. It kind of falls, rises, and goes all over, and then Trump says something and something else happens, and so on and so forth. And so people panic that, well, when it comes time for the deposit, I actually might not have what I thought I had, and I might not have that confidence. And so the deemed rate effectively is kind of a much more smoother curve. It may go up and it may go down, but your balance over time will be much smoother. It will look more like a savings account, and then you pull it out, and then you're ready to buy your first home. Now, we do want to emphasize that there are multiple rules, and there's like a process to this. It's not just like savings in, savings out, Bob's your uncle next day. You've got to do a few steps. You've got to use the money for what it's intended to be used for, so on and so forth. Now, I did say that I would just quickly jump over here to Perla. Perla probably, in my opinion, full disclosure, is a sponsor, an advertising sponsor of our finance podcast. We are not being paid to talk about Perla today, just as an FYI, but it does have probably the best material on this that you'll come across. So the First Home Super Saver Scheme, and basically it kind of looks like this, you're making contributions through time. So you get this kind of like every time you make a contribution for the First Home Super Saver Scheme, you kind of get this little bump. But then there's kind of this moment where you're kind of seeing it keep going up faster than a savings account. And remember, if you're two people saving up to $50,000 a year, only $15,000 a year, but $50,000 in total, in a couple, right? That's $100,000 over the span of that you use this tool, plus the deemed earnings, even if your super fund does go down a little bit. So that is really, really attractive for a lot of people. And over a long period of time, particularly with interest rates coming down and all this sort of stuff, over time, this does get really appealing to people, Gem.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so we've talked about the example of doing it as a lump sum, like you already having the money, so you've saved it from work or whatever, and then you putting it in. But if you had a really clear budget that you have X amount free, you have a certain amount of that you can save each month, you could potentially get work to do that as salary sacrifice, and that's going to count because it's on top. I think the Perla website gives an example of this person can save like $510 a month. So that's if it's in their bank account. That's what they can sacrifice in their budget and put into a separate. But if that went via salary sacrifice, it would actually be a higher amount because that's before the tax has been taken out. So that's one of the benefits of doing it that way is you're getting the tax saving every single pay if it's going straight in there, and more's going into super than you would get and be able to put in a bank account. Plus, we're pretty confident that the deemed rate is going to be better than what we could probably get on a savings account currently.
Yeah. So there's tax benefits and there's potentially a better return from the actual deemed rate of return. So coming back to our example, really crude example, where you would have money that you've got saved in a bank account and you think, I'll use this super saver scheme thing. It sounds pretty good. I put money into super. I claim a tax deduction, like I lodge that with my super fund. I'm doing $5,000 or I'm doing 10 or 15 or whatever. Being mindful that I don't want to breach the 30 on my overall, but that's a minor thing. What happens on the tax side of things? Like, am I taxed when I pull the money out to buy my house?
Yep. So before we jump onto that, I'll just clarify. You can also, because there's two caps. There's the concessional, the 30 we're talking about, and then there's non-concessional. So you can put this money in as non-concessional as well. So the 15,000 could have gone in via salary sacrifice, or you claimed a tax deduction, or it could have gone in after tax. So there's different ways. So if you've already maxed out your 30,000 without doing the first home super saver, imagine, work pays you that well, you can still do the 15,000 via the non-tax way. You just don't claim a tax for that.
Yeah, so you're saying there's the practical difference here is if I was to put $15,000 in and I claim a tax deduction, obviously I'm going to win because I'm like, well, that's a tax deduction. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
But I don't have to claim a tax deduction. I can just put $15,000 in if I thought that I was going to breach a cap or something.
Yeah, or maybe it doesn't warrant it with your taxable income. So when we claim the tax deduction, it's so the super fund deducts 15% of that and it takes it out of our marginal tax rate. But maybe you haven't actually earned that much and you talk to an accountant or a financial advisor and they say, actually, for you, it's not worth claiming it this year. Just put it in as after tax. So either way, it's going to suit you. And then you've got it there as the deeming, and then maybe you're doing that for discipline, for deeming, and a heap of other reasons. But it can really suit lots of reasons. But the main one is that tax. So that's why we've kind of focused on that, the concessional. But your question on how the money comes out. So when you pull the money out, let's say you've pulled out 50 plus your you used it to its complete upper limit. You pull out your 50 plus your deeming. That is going to be taxed at your marginal tax rate with a 30% offset. So as of next year, the medium as of next year, and I mean like 1st of July, like the main tax bracket that most people kind of fall in is that 30%. So
yeah, 30%.
Yeah, it's going to 30. So if your marginal tax rate's 30% and you get a 30% offset, that's zero, but you will pay the Medicare levy, which is 2%. So you might actually only have 2%. If you're a high income earner, it might be, what's the next one up? Like
45, is it?
Yeah. So it'll be whatever your marginal tax rate works out to be. So your salary plus this money, but this money attracts a 30% discount on the tax you're going to pay.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is the discount, that's a poorly drawn attempt at discount. So we've got marginal tax rate. So like if I'm on the 30% tax rate, there's a deduction of 30% off that rate, but everyone pays the Medicare levy.
Yes. That's right. So it might be that you don't pay, like you pay 2%, it might be that you pay a little bit more than that, but it's really designed that regardless of your marginal tax rate, you should get some kind of benefit there.
Okay.
Yep. So that you do your lodgement with the ATO to get the determination of how much you're allowed to take out and what your deemed amount is, and then they'll help you work out what the tax is, and you'll get the net amount in your bank account.
All right. So let's do a worked example for people from end to end using the government calculator here, Gem. So I'm just going to ask you to make up some stuff on the fly. So, what, for the purposes of this calculator, what's your income?
Let's go 80,000.
Okay. 80,000. And this says annual salary sacrifice, but it could just be contribution, claim a tax deduction, right?
Yeah, it could. It'll net off at the same at the end of the year. It's just whether you're getting the tax saving in your pay every fortnight or. But yes, let's say 8,000. So I'm doing like an extra 10%.
So you're going to do an extra $8,000 every financial year for this scheme. Okay. So now we can see after 7 years with the first home super saver scheme, young Gemma would have $55,230. $55,230. Had young Gemma not used the first home super saver scheme and just used a regular old savings account, after 7 years, $38,256. In other words, $16,974 more.
Plus, I know Gemma, and she would have dipped into that a lot because she has no discipline.
Okay, so Gemma has no discipline, but people are like, well, that's a long time to save. People are like, well, that seems complicated, but guys, this is worth it if it gets you into a bigger and better house. Remember, we've talked about this on the show before. If you're going to buy a house and you've got a decent income, typically a bank will lend you 4 times your income or 5 times your annual income in loan. So, for example, the more you save, the more you earn, the more you can borrow if that's what you want to do. That you'll get you a bigger loan at the end of the day for a better house. So your first house might be a better one. That's what I mean to say.
And this might be, you might then play around with this and go, actually, I can stretch myself a little bit more and salary sacrifice more. Or you could be doing a bit of keeping your options open. And maybe you go, right, in my budget, I know I can get work to salary sacrifice this, my pay will go down and I can live off that comfortably. But maybe then you want to stretch yourself and say, well, in my bank account, I'm going to try and save an extra $100 a pay. That's the one there that if you have to, you can get it back, because this one you can't, it's locked away. So you could be doing a bit of both that keeps your options open, that stretches you without, setting yourself up to fail, that you've cut yourself way too short. This doesn't have to be the only one. It can work really well in conjunction with other things that you're doing. And on top of that, you could be getting grants, concessions. So talking to your mortgage broker about how you're using this and what else is coming up, and still having a good savings, plan and cash flow plan with your bank account. All these things can work really well together.
Yeah. So this is just one of the tools in your arsenal to get you saving. And chances are, if you're thinking about this strategy, you're thinking my wage might actually go up faster than what the government has assumed in their calculator, which, as you can see here, is 3.7%. You think, well, over the next 2 years, 3 years, I'm going to earn more, so I should save more, not spend more. I should save more. So you can then put it towards a house, right? And so we'll put a link in the show notes for this episode and on YouTube. It's already in there for this particular calculator, as well as the Pearl literature, which has some really good worked examples as well. The key thing is from this is that, yes, it may seem a little bit complicated at first. So yes, you may need to re-listen to this webinar/podcast, but crucially, it is a way to accelerate your savings very, very effectively. And it's getting easier to use this scheme, I would say, generally speaking, Jen.
Absolutely. I remember when it first came out. Even when I was kind of still giving advice like 5 years ago, and it was just so complicated. And the timing, like if you stuffed up the timing or the determination didn't come back in time, because you have to, there's lots of little things about that, but they've made it a lot more streamlined. You can do it through your MyGov. Your mortgage broker can really work with you on it. So I think it's something that everybody should be considering if it's worth it them, if it's your whole strategy or if it's a part of it, and then you're kind of doing a little bit of both. But either way, it's something you should be looking into, just like what concessions and grants and things that you're eligible for, because it's potentially going to be a leg up for you. You can go down to these calculators and look at how it looks for you, and then weigh up, do I feel comfortable with it? I think one of the really common questions is, what if I do it and then don't buy a house?
Yeah. Well, what happens?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. It can stay in there, and future you, retired you, is going to be very thankful that you've just chucked all this extra money in. So it can stay in there, or potentially you can apply to get it out, and then you haven't bought a property. You would pay your marginal tax rate on it. So you would have to pay back that 30% tax on it.
Effectively, the tax savings that you claimed, you would have to give back.
To pay back, yeah. So you'd get a tax bill for a few thousand, but you'd saved that tax, you put it in there, so you just, you just
works
take
out
that
in the wash.
hit. Yeah. But you might decide to do a little bit of both. Take some out, keep some in, so that future you's happy as well. But you have, from when you do the determination that you're taking the money out, you have 12 months to use it, and you can, in most cases, apply for an extension.
Right. So if I pulled the money out, I went through my MyGov and I filed with the ATO. I have to get the withdrawal request thingo to get the money out.
The determination, yep.
Yeah. So that's how practically I do it. I go into MyGov and I do the determination, and I get the answer. Then I can pull the money out, right? But I've got 12 months from that day to buy the house.
Yeah, so I think what happens is you get the determination, and so the ATO says, yep, you've got this, and then you've got 12 months to actually sign a contract and say, yep, I'm going to use this, and then you can do the extension as well and say, oh, well, I didn't end up getting a contract, can we wait? But what happens actually, if for some reason you don't put the money back in and adjust the tax, you can't use the scheme again. So you can net it all off, and there's this special word for it. What's it called? I wrote it down because it's a silly name. It's like it's tax funny. Known as tax made good. Like, okay, cool. Who thought of that? So you can do your tax made good, which means it's as if it didn't, happen and the scheme's done. But then they won't let you do it again. Okay, so they don't let you go, oh, next time try hard. Yeah. Once, if you don't use it, but then you might have, if it's come to that, you've probably ruled out first home ownership. Maybe you've gone for an investment property, whatever. But I think with this, the most important thing is advice. Using the calculator, understanding it, your own education is so vital. But advice, and it might actually be that you have an industry super fund that provides intra-fund financial advice on contributions, and maybe this is something that they actually cover, low cost, free. But this is one of the things that, like super contributions and all the rules and bring forward and carry forward, I kind of go, this is something you don't want to get wrong. And I think that it's important to get advice on it, because if you stuff it up, it's impossible to undo the damage. Not impossible, but it's very, very difficult, even for, financial advisors.
So, okay. So research. Get an understanding of it before June 30th. We'll include resources in the show notes. So I'll include the 3 that I think are really important. If you don't know anything about super whatsoever and you just clicked on this and you're like, oh, that looks cool, take our free course. It's the basics of super. Number 2 is we'll include a link to the government calculator, the Perla research we pulled up before. And we've also got the Rask community, which you can jump into. It's totally free and ask questions. There's actually quite a few financial advisors in there that can guide you to the right resources. Yes. I want to finish with a couple of rapid fire questions, some myths and stuff for you, Gem. Is that all right? So just to really put a bow on this.
See.
Okay. Imagine this. Let's start with the myths. Someone walks up to you and they say, oh, Gemma, I've got $50,000 in super right now. I heard that I can take that out and buy a house. True or false?
False, unless you've salary sacrificed it and you were magically within 15,000 every year.
Okay. So
but I'm just going to say false for majority of people, false.
Okay. So it's only the bits that I've put in voluntarily. It's not what my employer put in for me. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't want to use... They then go on to say, well, I don't want to use my money because it's risky to invest in super because I might need the money. Every podcast tells me don't invest money that you might need in the next 3 years. What do you think?
That is true unless you're utilizing this scheme, which has a deemed interest rate, a calculation set by the government. And it's not attached to your investment returns at all.
Okay, cool. Finally, someone says it's too complicated. I can't be bothered.
I hear, I absolutely hear. But the more you learn about something, the less complicated it gets. You use the calculator, your brain starts getting onto it. You talk to the mortgage broker, who should be all over it as well. And you talk to your super fund. Everything is complicated until we understand it. Like, this is not something we're born with knowing. So if you want a leg up with getting a home loan, you should be learning about this, at least so you can rule it out or say, yay or nay. It's not going to be for everybody, but it's worth investigating and just seeing if it's something that you feel is worth doing for the amount of savings that you'll get. And that calculator will tell you that.
Okay. Finally, I want to ask you do you have any tips or strategies? We're recording this on the 5th of June, 2025. Do you have any tips or strategies, reminders that you want people to take away from if they get into this podcast and they're like, okay, it sounds really compelling. I've got to pull my finger out. What do you want to leave them with? Or what's one tip or strategy?
That would be to start talking to your mortgage broker about if this fits in with your timing and things. And just a superannuation in general tip is I recommend for all my clients and whoever will listen, set a reminder in your diary for the 1st of June every single year. 1st of June is a great time to look at your super to see if you want to make a contribution for the government co-contribution, salary sacrifice, this scheme, pretty much anything, because you already know what you've earned for the last 11 months and you've still got a month, 4 weeks to take action. So 1st of June, I think, is one of the most important dates that you should be looking at your finances, not when the new year's clicked over.
Okay, great. I think that's a great reminder. And I will remind people that if you are using the First Home Super Saver Scheme or plan to, June 30th is kind of that magical date. It's the tax year. You may be able to contribute more this side of June 30th if you plan to use this scheme. But you do need to act in the next few weeks, I would say, just to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. Obviously, don't put money in without understanding what you're doing. But make sure that you are aware of the June 30 timeline so that you can make an informed decision. Now, if you do have any follow-up questions, good to see you in the chat, Winter. If you do have any follow-up questions, you can reach us via the link in your podcast player that says ask a question, or head to community.rask.com.au and we'll be able to help you out and point you in the right direction over there. Plenty of resources in this podcast player. So wonderful to chat with you, Gem, as always.